Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about patch 5.3 in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The patch is available for content creators at the moment. Now, I am not allowed to actually show you gameplay, but I can read about the notes and I can give you my perspective on certain things. There are some very important things that have been changed, though. I wish to state from the onset that from my point of view, with regards to patch and the patch notes, it seems it's focused very heavily on the multiplayer balance side of things, or unit balance side of things. We got some pretty important campaign changes, AI behavior changes before. We're still getting a bunch of map changes, battle map changes in the campaign, but a lot of the substantive changes do seem to be coming out with the Ogre, Greenskin, Khorne reworks DLC. So, with 5.3, let's talk about some very important things over here. Mercenary recruitment rework. Now, you get Ogre Bulls with dual weapons, Man-Eaters, Mornfrag Cavalry, and Ogre Giants. Beforehand, you could only get Ogre Bulls. Now you can get all of these units. How is this in practice? Well, if you look at various YouTube videos that are out there, in practice, depends on the camp level, I believe. But the reason I say I believe is if you've played any campaign of Immortal Empires at any point, you know how durable or not so durable Ogre camps are in the hands of the AI. So this is useful. You might think this is useful for Xiao Ming. In theory, yes. In practice, no. In fact, off the top of my head, I haven't tried out every single campaign personally, and I can't really go into details, but I think we're gonna run into the issue of the problems that Ogre camps have in the way they're implemented right now. So it's good that we have these units. It is certainly a lot better than what we had before in theory, but in practice, you just end up struggling. You can recruit them. They are available, and this is useful for certain races. I don't know, maybe with Scrag, if you're playing Belegar or Forgrim, or Elspeth, just an example, or the Ogre mercenaries near Draika, just some ideas over there. They are aware that Xiao Ming's benefits don't apply. That's an issue that they mention, but they will resolve it. So it's kind of weird that they didn't apply. I guess like the whole mercenary system of Warhammer 3 ended up being abysmal. So I'm not sure how exactly. So I guess it only applies to Ogre Bulls at the moment. But yeah, Cafe might have a lot more flexibility with regards to that. In theory, not necessarily in practice. Then you have Ogre Bounties. Great Book of Grudges has done a video on this. Now you look at the rewards of this. You see those rewards. You see how long these objectives last. Here's what I can say. The objectives do happen a lot. And, anything that's public, it's free game, right? The objectives do happen a lot. You complete an objective, you get another one. But here's the problem with it. From my perspective of these bounties. One, the rewards are not particularly great. Except camp growth. But that's a whole video that I'll be doing tomorrow. But suffice to say, it is an improvement in certain ways. On the flip side, there are certain issues. We're obviously getting a portion of what they're reworking for the Ogres here. The mercenary contracts and the recruitment of Ogre mercenaries. Those are going to be part of the Ogre rework, but we absolutely need a camp rework as well to go with that. But suffice to say, this change in isolation is much better than before, but it still has some issues. But basically, the way it works right now is you get all these objectives, they have a certain timer, you can complete them, it shows up completed for one turn, and then once it's complete in the next turn, you'll get another objective. That's how it works. Obviously, objectives can be removed if, the target has been eliminated, if it's a lord or something, or settlement. I would say it's annoying that you have to raise or sack a settlement, because you're struggling for money. I mean, if you're playing Ogres, probably you would want to sack settlements anyway, but you might also want to take certain elements at a high level to be able to trade them. But again, like I'll talk more in detail about ogres later on. New magic items. So they can drop in battles, generic items, and unique items. There are a number of effects, but I haven't seen them. So, just can't really comment on that. I think it's just something you'll notice as you're playing through a campaign and, just come up, right? Now, this is an interesting one. I'll do more, talking about campaign stuff when I can actually show you campaign footage, but this is really interesting because it feels sometimes research is slow and you're wasting, research points, or the percentages, the various benefits you have is not particularly great. But now, this has actually been improved, so you'll be able to research a bit faster, and it won't feel like, at least this is my read on it, it won't feel like it has so far in terms of research where you only feel like you get the substantive benefit if you have a significant amount, like 200%, right? Here it's going to be a case of even 5%, 10% actually means a lot more than it did before. I mean, 10% can mean a lot, can already mean quite a bit in certain situations, but other times it basically feels like the way the system works on the live version is that it feels like you're only getting a benefit when you can reduce the research time by 1 turn. Here it's like you get research point surplus, which carry over, which speed up research in general. Then a quality of life change with movement range display army discipline army confirmation button, new graveguard with halberd units, so anti-large, and armor piercing units over there. With they're using, like, the model of graveguard could really use an update, and so could the icon of the old ones. Then, battle map tree cluster update, so there's quite a few maps that they have updated over here, which is good. So various changes for modding. So address the known issue for modders by removing that previous cap on the maximum number of provinces, now allowing more than 255 provinces. Which is interesting for the sake of the old world mod. And yes, Cast Robbie, all this does, like, he's actually mentioned there, so yeah. Good job to Cast Robbie over there for bringing this up, because, you kind of feel it sometimes in, like, the old world where certain provinces have few to regions. The distance is, like, I'm fine with the idea of distances being greater than Immortal Empires, but sometimes it's absolutely ridiculous. So I guess Cast Robbie, so I guess that's an explanation for why that was happening in particular. And various bug fixes and all that. Just, various fixes over here. Now, some very interesting things with regards to these patch notes, though, is with regards to the battle changes. Now, most of these things are not necessarily substantial enough to talk about on their own. Like, apparently, like, the multiplayer community had ongoing discussions, as far as I can tell, with Creative Assembly on the subject. Or certainly multiplayer content creators have done various discussions. I focus on campaign aspects. I certainly don't focus on multiplayer, so I'm not really going to address most of these things, but there are absolutely some very important points I wish to address in this video. First off, the Lamassu mount is getting better. It used to be basically a crap mount compared to what was before. In general, the Lamassu was pretty crap, right? But now it's getting an HP buff, a spell resistance buff, so you may have a reason to actually use it versus a Taurus. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but certainly I actually get annoyed when I'm playing Cast Dwarf campaigns and it switches automatically to the Lamassu at a certain point, because I really couldn't give a shit about using that. Then, various changes over here. Upkeep changes, recruitment changes, all that kind of stuff. Okay, all fair enough. But here are some very important ones. Dwarves. Yes, dwarves have gotten a nerf. Some would say it's very necessary. I don't know necessarily, but like Demon Slayers, Dragon Slayers have gotten nerfed. Thunder Barges have gotten an increase in recruitment cost. Not sure this is going to satisfy the multiplayer community, but I think CA understands that they don't want to go, too ridiculous with the price. Because you got to balance, because you can't just win with thunder barges but the multiplayer situation with them is not necessarily great. They have also increased upkeep. They've made a change to bolt throwers, so they've decreased the health of each individual bolt thrower, as well as reducing the number of crew members manning the bolt throwers within the unit. And they've increased the reload time. Like, bolt throwers are, when it comes to campaign, you probably want to use it unless your enemy has a lot of artillery, you know that. And even then, I'd rather get cannons. But for multiplayer, that is a different discussion, because you have so many entities, and in artillery duels, when your opponent actually is competent, unlike the AI, it is actually important to have more entities. So they're trying to make the bolt thrower useful. But here's the important thing. Like, they're buffing flame cannon range. They're cheapening rangers with great weapons. And very importantly, they're reducing Quarreler with Grey Weapon upkeep cost. Okay, so people might be more incentivized to use them. But here's the thing that's very, very important. The Gyrocopter and Gyrobomber changes. These, I would say, are actually more important. Like, people talk about the Thunder Barge a lot, right? People bitch and moan about that. But honestly, Gyrocopters have defined the Dwarf meta since Thrones Decay came out in the campaign. So Gyrocopters, the regular ones, can no longer fire while moving. If you've watched Legend of Total War play Malachi with Gyrocopters, which he was inspired by Doomstack I sent him, he uses a lot of regular Gyrocopters because they can fire while moving. Well, now they've gotten some fairly substantial nerfs. So they're doing less damage, they're doing less armor-piercing damage, and they're no longer firing while moving. Because it felt like regular Gyrocopters were too effective for what they were doing. Then, Gyrocopters with brimstone guns, they're doing less armor-piercing, melee damage and all that, but importantly, they get... both of them do, right, with melee damage. But they also do, like, the regular ones do less damage, but the brimstone guns have more ammo, which actually was a problem. You could run out of ammo. And the troll hammer torpedo ones are getting some much needed changes in some ways. Like, all of them are getting their melee damage reduced, but these guys are getting more ammo, so they're more useful, but keep in mind, limited quantity. Gyro bombers also can't fire while moving anymore. So all of that fire while moving with gyrocopters and gyro bombers has been removed. I am perfectly fine with this. Like, here's my view. Gyro bombers are absurdly fucking strong. How absurdly strong? Understand that even when they're standing still and shooting at an enemy, they kill lords. They kill legendary lords. Gyro bombers, specifically. Like, the real dwarf doomstack in a campaign, the one that's effective from both an economy perspective, acquirability perspective, all that, is not the gyrocopter one. Or the Thunderbarge one is the freaking gyro bomber one, especially if you're playing as Malachi. They've also buffed the missile block chance for Ancestor Spirits, or the Fane ones, and that is pretty important. As well, making them more useful. The steam tank can no longer fire its hull mounted cannon in melee. Okay, that was a bit ridiculous. Same with the land ship. The Jade Longma is now causing fear. All right. And Jade and Jet Lions do more armor piercing melee damage. Okay. But here's the thing that I would really focus on. Like, also the recruitment cost for Wyvern mounts has been reduced. But here's a really interesting one. Not the Corn one, not Kislev. Though Kislev is actually some concern. Like, they're nerfing war sleds. Like, they're nerfing both heavy war sleds and light war sleds. So they're going to no longer be absurdly strong. Like, from what I know from the multiplayer community, war sleds were so strong, or Kislev is so strong in multiplayer, that they actually are banned in a lot of games because they're ridiculous. Like, Kislev is crap to play in a campaign, but multiplayer is a different discussion. Then various changes to Lizardmen. Basically every race has gotten, some changes over here, right? But here's some very interesting ones, and I have to scroll down. all the way. Like, no Ogre changes right now, because obviously those are going to come out with the next patch, which based on leaks, and mind you, I have no notion of this from CA, but based on leaks, it might be coming out in November, which means that as content creators are probably going to get it 1-2 weeks before, something like that. Maybe sooner than that, I have no idea. I couldn't tell you if I did. But going further and further and further, here's the really significant one from my point of view. Carronades, Mortars, Queen Bess, Aranissa, Salt Spite, Sirens, and Fellbats, like one way or another, like either cost reduction for multiplayer and crucially a fucking leadership buff. You know what's horrible? Having an entire army that has shit to leadership. And that's the problem with Vampire Coast. And it's particularly a problem when your artillery units have crap leadership. 10 leadership is actually a significant increase. To give you an idea, the leadership increase from normal to very high is like 9, if I'm not mistaken. But this is basically an enormous buff for these units. So it seems that CA has finally moved away from the backlash they got back in Warhammer 2 with like, oh, vampires are too strong. They're a crap faction right now. I think they're moving carefully because they don't want to deal with the backlash again. And, you know, keep in mind, a lot of these changes that you're seeing here are designed based on the multiplayer community feedback, like what they've collected on Reddit, on forums, what content creators have collected, what people who organize tournaments have told them. This is all based on it. So Queen Bess and artillery is going to be better, which, yeah, it's kind of sad that the Vampire Coast doesn't even have great artillery. Because they don't, actually. They genuinely don't. Like, let me put it like this. You have 2 proper artillery units, then you have an infantry artillery unit, which is not as good as, you know, cannons. Dwarves, Empire, Cafe, Chaos Dwarves are much, much better in terms of artillery. And it kind of makes sense. Vampire Coast is not using top-of-the-line artillery equipment. They're using what they can scavenge from the freaking Empire and Dwarves on the seas. That's what the Vampire Coast is using. So it makes sense from that perspective. But when your entire theme of the race is built on artillery and you have bad artillery, yeah, it doesn't lend itself to a great gameplay. So I do appreciate that. Like, you know, I'm looking at these kind of things. I'm seeing what CA is looking to change going forward, or what they might tweak. Hopefully they continue with the Vampire Coast. They certainly need some genuine improvements. But yeah, pretty much every race has had some changes one way or another. Notable exception being Ogres, but again, DLC coming out. I think the problem with Ogres is, I don't know about the multiplayer situation, but from the campaign, I've always maintained that Ogres are a bad race. But what's infuriating with them is not so much that they're a bad race, is that they have, on paper, the things that could make them a great race. Like, having pretty much your entire army, having a wall breaker, is a pretty big deal in campaigns. Some of the units and heroes and all that, really, really solid. Just inaccessibility, crap economy. So, I'm really curious to see how things are going to shape up with that. But yeah, Gyrocopter nerf, I agree with it. Gyro Bomber nerf, well, I mean, they're still very strong, don't make a mistake. It's just going to be a case people will be incentivized to not just use the regular gyrocopters. They'll still be useful. You got to understand, they still have bombs. They can still do a decent amount of damage. And that flying range capability for a unit that cheap is not something you can replicate with other units. That's all I have to say. Christine signing out. Stay tuned for more.